The night I was laid off, I expected comfort from the people who raised me. Instead, my father hurled my laptop bag onto the wet concrete. My sister shrieked about how my sudden unemployment would completely ruin her luxury lifestyle. They demanded I pack immediately so she and her arrogant husband could take my bedroom to save money. I walked out into the freezing rain without shedding a single tear, keeping my mouth shut about the digital marketing empire and the coastal real estate actually in my name. 3 hours later, their flawless suburban facade began to violently crumble. I am Allison, 34 years old, and for my entire life my family treated me like a disposable piece of their puzzle. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who wildly underestimated your actual worth. The heavy rain battered the windows of my parents' suburban home. I stood in the entryway, dripping wet, having just received the news of my sudden layoff. I had driven straight home seeking solace. My father, Richard, a man who measured human value strictly by job titles, did not offer me a towel. He simply shoved my bag toward the door. "You are 34 years old and you just lost your only source of income," Richard barked, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I cannot support a grown woman who cannot hold down a simple marketing position. We have bills to pay, Allison. Gather your things and get out." Before I could process the absurdity of his statement, considering I had been quietly paying their premium health insurance for years, my 30-year-old sister Brittany stormed into the hallway. She was waving her manicured hands, her face twisted into a mask of selfish panic. "Are you kidding me right now?" Brittany yelled, ignoring the fact that I was shivering. "You lost your job, Allison. Who is going to pay the remaining loan installments on my Tesla this month? You know my influencer sponsorships have been slow lately. You are literally ruining my life with your incompetence." I stared at her, marveling at her delusion. Brittany had spent her adult life playing the role of a wealthy influencer, entirely funded by the people around her. That is exactly the problem with people who lack basic financial literacy. The smooth voice belonged to Jamal, my 32-year-old brother-in-law. Jamal stepped out of the living room, adjusting his tailored suit. As an African-American finance broker who threw around Wall Street buzzwords, he never missed an opportunity to talk down to me. He smirked, leaning against the doorway with a look of absolute superiority. "You see, Allison, in the real world of high finance, we anticipate market downturns," Jamal mansplained, using that condescending tone he reserved exclusively for me. "You failed to diversify your portfolio. You relied on a single paycheck like an amateur. Brittany and I cannot be held responsible for your lack of vision. My vast investments are currently securing the financial future of this entire family. You are a bad investment, and frankly, you are just dragging our overall portfolio down." I looked at Jamal, taking in his gold watch and custom shoes. He loved bragging about his broker bonuses and supposedly brilliant hedge fund strategies. He had convinced my parents he was the financial savior of the family. He had no idea that I knew exactly how heavily leveraged he actually was. My mother, Susan, glided into the hallway, her expression as cold as the marble floor beneath our feet. She looked at me like a ruthless landlord inspecting a damaged property. "Jamal is absolutely right," Susan stated firmly, crossing her arms over her cashmere sweater. "We have made a final decision. Since you are now unemployed and cannot contribute to the household, you need to leave tonight. Brittany and Jamal need to move into your master bedroom immediately. It is much larger, and they need to save money while Jamal finalizes his next corporate merger. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack whatever fits in your car. We are not running a charity operation here, Allison. Golden children require proper space to grow, and you are just taking up valuable real estate." The audacity of her cruel words hung heavily in the air. They truly believed I was a helpless, broke failure. They believed their suburban house, the one I had silently rescued from bank foreclosure 3 years ago, was entirely theirs to kick me out of. They believed Jamal was a financial genius and that Brittany was a rising star. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not fall to my knees and beg them for a shred of mercy. I simply looked at my mother, then at my father, and finally locked eyes with Jamal. His smug, victorious smile made my next decision incredibly, undeniably easy. I walked over to the doorway, bent down, and picked up my discarded laptop bag. The heavy rain was blowing directly onto the porch, soaking my shoes, but I felt nothing but a blazing, intense clarity. I had spent years hiding my true success to avoid their greedy demands, playing the role of the quiet, average middle child. I had let them treat me like a heavy burden just to keep the peace. That fragile peace was now officially over. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, gave Jamal one last terrifyingly calm smile, and stepped out into the freezing downpour without looking back. 3 hours later, the rain had stopped, leaving the suburban streets remarkably quiet. Inside the warm house, my family was likely celebrating their newly claimed space. But outside, the peaceful silence was suddenly shattered by the loud, rhythmic beeping of a large commercial tow truck, slowly backing straight into their pristine driveway. The flashing amber lights of the tow truck sliced through the heavy suburban rain, casting long, distorted shadows against my parents' pristine white siding. Inside the house, the silence of their victory was about to be shattered. I sat in my car, parked 2 blocks away, watching the scene unfold through my rearview mirror, sipping a lukewarm coffee. I had timed this perfectly. My phone vibrated with a notification confirming the repossession order had been executed. Right on cue, the front door of the house burst open. Brittany charged out onto the wet driveway wearing her expensive silk pajamas, screaming at the top of her lungs. Her high-pitched voice echoed down the quiet street, waking the neighborhood she cared so much about impressing. "Wait! Stop! What are you doing?" Brittany shrieked, waving her arms frantically as the tow truck operator hooked thick steel chains to the front axle of her prized pearl-white Tesla. "You cannot take that car. It is mine." The tow truck driver, a burly man in a yellow rain slicker, did not even look up. He continued ratcheting the winch, the heavy metal clicking loudly over the sound of the rain. Jamal stormed out of the front door seconds later, holding an umbrella over his head, looking furious that his sleep had been interrupted. He marched down the driveway with the misplaced confidence of a man who thought wearing a suit during the day gave him legal authority at night. "Hey, buddy," Jamal shouted, puffing out his chest. "I suggest you unhook that vehicle immediately before I call the police. I am a licensed finance broker. I know exactly how property laws work, and this is an illegal seizure. You are messing with the wrong family." The driver finally paused, wiping rain from his face. He pulled a laminated clipboard from his jacket and shoved it toward Jamal. "It is not a seizure, buddy. It is a repossession." Jamal scoffed, batting the clipboard away. "That is impossible. I handle all the finances for this family. Our portfolio is ironclad. You have the wrong house and the wrong car. Unhook it now." The driver tapped a thick finger against the paperwork. "The vehicle is registered to a Brittany Anderson, but the primary loan holder and sole financier is Allison Anderson. The auto pay was canceled exactly 3 hours ago. Since the account was already in arrears from previously missed payments by the secondary driver, the bank ordered an immediate retrieval. Step back from the vehicle, or I will be the one calling the cops." Brittany let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She turned to Jamal, her perfectly manicured hands gripping his shirt. "Jamal, do something. I have a brand collaboration shoot tomorrow. I cannot be seen driving your basic sedan. Tell him who you are. Fix this right now." Jamal grabbed the paperwork, his eyes scanning the document rapidly. His arrogant expression cracked for a split second as he realized the driver was telling the absolute truth. I had been paying the $1,200 monthly note on that car for 2 years. Brittany had promised to take over the payments once her influencer career took off, which translated to her buying designer handbags while I quietly kept the bank away. But the moment they threw me out, I simply logged into the bank portal and removed my payment method. The bank, seeing a history of late payments from Brittany's end, wasted no time. "This is a clerical error," Jamal insisted, though his voice lacked its usual booming authority. "Let me just call the bank right now. I can authorize a wire transfer from my brokerage account to clear this up." The driver laughed, a rough barking sound. "Bank closed 4 hours ago. Even if they were open, I do not take wire transfers. I take cars. Have a nice night, folks." The winch groaned and the Tesla was hoisted into the air, its alarm blaring uselessly into the stormy night. Brittany collapsed against Jamal, sobbing hysterically about her ruined image and her stranded status. Neighbors were now peeking through their blinds, watching the golden child of the neighborhood lose her ultimate status symbol in the pouring rain. I watched the tow truck pull away from the curb, carrying Brittany's ego down the street. A moment later, my cell phone illuminated the dark interior of my car. The caller ID flashed with Jamal's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow, deep breath before finally answering. "Allison, what is wrong with you?" Jamal roared into the phone, not bothering with a greeting. His voice was shaking with pure rage. "Did you seriously just have Brittany's car repossessed out of spite? You petty, unemployed loser! I am going to sue you for emotional distress." I kept my voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. "I lost my job, Jamal. I am simply cutting back on unnecessary expenses. Is that not what you told me to do? You did this to humiliate us!" He spat, the sound of Brittany crying loudly in the background. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of my success and Brittany's beauty. You think this makes you look powerful. You are living in your car while we are sleeping in a 5-bedroom house. You have nothing." I leaned back against the headrest, watching the rain slide down my windshield. "I am just practicing the financial literacy you preached to me earlier tonight," I said calmly. "A smart broker drops bad investments. You two are a terrible investment. Have a good night, Jamal." I hung up the phone before he could scream another word and immediately blocked his number. I knew Jamal. I knew his fragile masculinity could not handle being bested by a woman he considered beneath him. He would not just let this go. He would need to prove his dominance to remind himself that he was the financial genius, and I was just the helpless sister-in-law. Back inside the house, Jamal threw his phone onto the kitchen counter, his chest heaving with anger. Brittany was still crying, demanding he buy her a better car by morning, but Jamal was not listening to her. His mind was racing, calculating how to strike back, how to crush me so completely that I would have to come crawling back and beg for forgiveness. He stormed past Brittany and headed straight for the home office. He locked the door behind him and booted up his high-powered laptop. Jamal had a secret. 2 years ago, when I had asked him for advice on a minor tax issue, he had insisted on setting up a shared portal. He claimed it was standard procedure for brokers. I had trusted him then, providing my primary banking login credentials. I had changed the password since, but Jamal was cunning. He had secretly routed a backdoor authorization through a dummy email account, keeping persistent access to my retail checking account just in case he ever needed leverage. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard security protocols using the outdated authentication tokens he had saved. He pulled up my primary checking account, the one where my final severance paycheck from the marketing firm was scheduled to land. He saw the balance. He saw the pending deposits. A malicious, predatory smile spread across his face, replacing his previous anger. "You want to play financial games," Allison Jamal whispered to the empty room, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in his eyes. "Let us see how financially literate you are when you cannot even buy a cup of coffee." With 3 rapid clicks, Jamal submitted a series of fraudulent chargeback reports, flagged the account for suspicious international wire transfers, and triggered a hard security freeze on my entire retail banking profile. The system immediately locked the account, displaying a bright red banner warning that all funds were suspended, pending a lengthy fraud investigation. He leaned back in his leather chair, thoroughly satisfied, completely unaware that he had just stepped onto a landmine. Miles away from Jamal's smug celebration, I sat in the plush leather chair of my suite at the Four Seasons holding my phone. The screen illuminated the dim room as a text message chimed through. It was from Jamal. The image attached was a screenshot of an internal banking portal displaying my primary retail checking account. A bright red banner across the top read, "Account frozen, fraud investigation pending." Below the image, his message was simple and venomous. "Good luck surviving on the streets, dropout." I stared at the text. I did not panic. I did not feel a sudden rush of anxiety about how I was going to buy my next meal. Instead, a genuine relaxed laugh escaped my lips. Jamal thought he had just delivered a fatal blow. He truly believed that the $60,000 sitting in that checking account was my entire life savings. He thought he had severed my only lifeline. What the self-proclaimed financial genius failed to realize was that the frozen account was nothing more than a dummy payroll account. It was the account where I deposited the modest salary from my supposed marketing job. It was pocket change compared to the multi-million-dollar corporate trust held securely under Ocean Breeze Holdings, an entity Jamal did not even know existed. But his pathetic attempt at financial sabotage sent a very clear message. My family wanted a war. They wanted to strip away my resources and watch me beg. If that was the game they chose to play, it was time to show them what financial devastation actually looked like. For 7 long years, I had been the invisible pillar holding up their extravagant lifestyle. I had absorbed their massive expenses quietly, never asking for a thank you, simply because they were my family. That misguided loyalty ended tonight. I opened my laptop and pulled up my master financial spreadsheet. My first target was their communication. I picked up my phone and dialed the executive support line for our cellular provider. A cheerful representative named Marcus answered almost immediately. I provided my secure PIN and verified my identity as the primary account holder. Marcus, I need you to pull up the Anderson family plan, I instructed, keeping my voice entirely professional. I see it right here, Alice and Marcus replied. You have 5 active lines on our absolute top-tier unlimited global plan, including 3 device installment plans for the newest smartphones. How can I help you with this tonight? I want to terminate 4 of those lines, I said clearly. I want to leave only my personal line active. The lines belonging to Richard, Susan, Brittany, and Jamal must be disconnected immediately. Marcus paused, clearly surprised by the drastic request. I can certainly process that for you, Allison. However, I need to inform you that canceling those lines abruptly will immediately brick their cellular service. They will lose all data calling and texting capabilities. Furthermore, because the 3 devices are still under installment contracts, terminating, the lines will trigger an immediate acceleration of the remaining balances. It will result in a cancellation fee of roughly $4,000. Bill it to the corporate card ending in 4829, I said without a second of hesitation. Process the payment right now and cut their service. Within 3 minutes, the transaction was complete. I imagined Jamal staring at his phone waiting for my desperate reply, only to watch his signal bars drop to 0 and a no-service warning pop up on his screen. Brittany would no longer be able to live stream her fake influencer lifestyle. My parents could no longer call their country club friends to complain about me. They were digitally severed from the world. But I was just getting started. I clicked over to a second tab on my laptop and dialed the Platinum member hotline for our health insurance provider. This was the big one. This was the silent, massive expense I had carried on my back, while they treated me like a burden. A representative named Sarah answered the call. I went through the verification process again, pulling up the comprehensive family policy. Sarah, I am the sole guarantor and payer on this policy, I stated. I need to make an immediate modification to the coverage. Let me pull up your file. Sarah said, the clicking of her keyboard audible over the line. Okay, I have it here. You are currently paying a monthly premium of $2,800 to maintain comprehensive medical vision and premium dental coverage for Richard, Susan, and Brittany. What changes would you like to make? I want to remove Richard, Susan, and Brittany from the policy I instructed. Effective right this second. They are no longer authorized dependents under my coverage. Sarah hesitated. Allison, removing them without a qualifying life event typically requires a 30-day notice. However, since you are the sole financier and you are citing a complete separation of household, I can push this through as an emergency termination. I do need to warn you that the moment I click confirm, they will be entirely uninsured. Any outstanding medical claims or prescriptions currently processing will be denied. That is exactly what I want, I replied. Process the termination. As I waited on the line, memories of their overwhelming entitlement washed over me. I remembered my father complaining about a $50 copay for his physical therapy, completely ignoring the fact that I was paying thousands every month just so he could walk into that clinic. I remembered Brittany bragging to her friends about her flawless $10,000 porcelain veneers, failing to mention that my premium dental plan covered every single cent of the procedure. I remembered my mother claiming I was selfish with my money while she utilized the luxury concierge doctor service that I funded. All of that entitlement was built on my dime. "It is done," Sarah announced, bringing my focus back to the present. "The policy has been updated. You are now the only covered individual. Any attempt by the others to use the previous insurance information will be instantly rejected by our network." I thanked her and ended the call. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the hotel window at the city lights. They had kicked me out into the rain, assuming I would crumble. They had tried to freeze my bank account, assuming I would starve. They had no idea they had just declared war on the only person keeping them afloat. Meanwhile, across town, the reality of my actions was about to hit them head-on. Richard was standing at the counter of an upscale 24-hour pharmacy, tapping his credit card impatiently against the glass. He was loud, demanding, and completely oblivious to the line of tired customers forming behind him. He was there to pick up a highly specialized, customized compound medication for a minor golf injury that he insisted was a medical emergency. The young pharmacist behind the counter looked nervous as she scanned Richard's premium health insurance card into the system. The computer beeped a sharp, negative tone. The pharmacist frowned, hit a few keys, and swiped the card again. Another negative beep echoed in the quiet pharmacy. She looked up at my father, her expression a mix of confusion and strict adherence to store policy. "I am sorry, sir," the pharmacist said, holding up the plastic card. "This policy has been flagged as terminated." Richard's face turned beet red. He slammed his fist onto the counter, shouting that he was a Platinum Tier member and demanding she run it again or call her manager. Instead, the pharmacist reached under the counter, pulled out a pair of heavy metal scissors, and right in front of his face, cut his insurance card clean in half. Richard stared at the two halves of his platinum insurance card resting on the pharmacy counter. His jaw dropped. The pharmacist offered a sympathetic but firm smile, explaining that the primary account holder terminated the coverage an hour ago. Richard grabbed the pieces and stormed out of the pharmacy, his face burning with a mix of confusion and rage. He dialed his wife immediately, demanding to know what was happening. Susan dismissed his panic, assuming it was a simple bank error. She told him to hurry up and meet her at the upscale organic grocery store across town. They were hosting a lavish dinner party that evening for their country club friends, specifically designed to show off Jamal and Brittany moving into the master suite. Susan wanted everything perfect. She had already filled 2 shopping carts with imported cheeses, artisan breads, and expensive wine. Richard arrived at the store still clutching the broken plastic in his pocket, but pushed his anxiety down. Jamal was a successful broker. If Allison had thrown a tantrum and stopped paying for a few minor things, Jamal would easily cover it. That was the narrative they had built, and they were sticking to it. They wheeled their overflowing carts to the checkout lane, chatting loudly about their wealthy son-in-law, so the neighbors in line behind them could hear. The cashier, a young woman with a polite smile, scanned item after item. Truffle oil wild caught salmon cases of sparkling water. The total climbed past $300. Susan confidently swiped her primary credit card. The machine beeped a sharp negative tone. Declined. Susan laughed nervously, glancing back at the wealthy couple standing behind them. She blamed the machine, claiming the chip reader was faulty, and pulled out a different card, a joint account card. She swiped it. The machine beeped again. Declined. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He quickly reached for his own wallet and pulled out a high-limit card. He rarely used the one he kept for emergencies. He slid it into the reader. The screen flashed the same relentless message: insufficient funds. The cashier looked at them, her polite smile fading into awkward pity. The line behind them began to whisper. Susan frantically checked her banking app on her phone, her manicured fingers trembling. Every single account connected to Allison showed a zero available balance or a frozen status. Allison had not just canceled the insurance. She had systematically removed herself as the guarantor from every joint credit account they possessed, instantly crashing their credit limits to zero. The grocery manager stepped over quietly, asking if they needed to return the items. Susan, humiliated beyond belief, abandoned the carts right there in the aisle. She grabbed Richard by the arm and marched out of the automatic doors, her face flushed with absolute mortification. The moment the heavy glass doors of the grocery store slid shut behind them, Susan pulled out her phone. She stood in the middle of the parking lot surrounded by expensive cars and dialed my number. I answered on the second ring, sitting comfortably in my hotel suite. Susan did not even say hello. She launched into a hysterical screaming match, her voice echoing off the concrete. "You vindictive, jealous little brat," she yelled. I am standing outside the grocery store with our neighbors watching. Every single card just declined. Are you trying to embarrass us in front of our friends? I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. "You threw me out of the house in the middle of a storm, Mom," I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "I am just cutting back on my unnecessary expenses." Susan gasped, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "We gave you 30 minutes to leave because you lost your job. You have no money. You are a burden. How dare you cancel the credit cards? We need those for the dinner party tonight." I let out a dry laugh. "Golden children should pay for golden parents," I said smoothly. "Ask Jamal to use his massive broker bonuses to buy your truffle oil. He is the financial genius, right?" Susan screamed that I had always been insanely jealous of Brittany and her perfect life. "Perfection does not bounce a $300 grocery bill, Mom," I countered. "Call your golden son-in-law." I hung up the phone and blocked her number, enjoying the profound silence that followed. Back at the suburban house, the atmosphere was intensely chaotic. Susan and Richard burst through the front door, empty-handed, demanding immediate answers from Jamal. Jamal paced the living room, sweating slightly, insisting that the banks were just running routine security checks. He claimed his massive wealth was temporarily tied up in offshore hedge funds and high-yield corporate bonds. He promised he would absolutely resolve the minor cash flow issue by tomorrow morning. Brittany, completely ignoring her parents' frantic panic, was entirely focused on her own public image. Her phone had been constantly buzzing with messages from local friends asking why her luxury car was publicly repossessed. She could not handle the social humiliation. She desperately needed to prove to everyone that she was still incredibly wealthy, still successful, and completely unaffected by her older sister losing her mind. She grabbed a ring light, quickly set up her phone on the marble kitchen island, and started an Instagram live broadcast. Thousands of her dedicated followers tuned in almost immediately. Brittany plastered on a flawless fake smile, tightly wrapping her arm around a visibly stressed Jamal. "Hey guys," Brittany chirped brightly to the camera, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "So many of you have been asking about our upcoming anniversary plans. Well, Jamal just surprised me." To save face and prove my actions meant absolutely nothing. Brittany takes to Instagram Live announcing Jamal just booked them a $15,000 a night beachfront mansion in Carmel by the sea for their 5-year anniversary. Brittany's fake, perfectly curated smile beamed into the lenses of thousands of followers. She spun the narrative effortlessly, framing the sudden Carmel trip as a spontaneous display of Jamal's immense wealth and romantic nature. But the sweet facade quickly morphed into something far more venomous. As the stream continued, she adopted a practiced look of deep, sorrowful concern. She sighed heavily for the camera, adjusting the collar of her silk pajamas to ensure her collarbones looked perfectly fragile. "A lot of you have been messaging me about some crazy local rumors going around tonight," Brittany said, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "I absolutely hate bringing personal family drama onto this positive platform, but I have to address it to protect my peace. My older sister Allison is going through a severe toxic mental health crisis. She was fired from her basic marketing job today for sheer incompetence, and unfortunately, she is lashing out at us." Jamal leaned into the frame, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the protective, wealthy patriarch. We tried to support her financially and emotionally for years. He lied smoothly to the audience. But she has become incredibly toxic. She is completely broke and trying to sabotage our finances out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. We had to cut ties for our own safety. She is unhinged. By morning, the smear campaign was in full swing across every social media platform. Brittany posted tearful reels about the burden of having an unstable, jealous sibling, milking her followers for sympathy and engagement. Susan joined the fray immediately. She shared Brittany's video to her own circle of wealthy suburban housewives, adding lengthy captions about how heartbroken she was that her middle child had succumbed to severe mental illness. She claimed they had tried to stage an intervention, but I had violently rejected their love. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They were rewriting history in real time, transforming their brutal eviction of me into a tragic tale of parental sacrifice. Jamal took to his professional networks, posting thinly veiled warnings about toxic family members draining generational wealth. They painted me as a desperate, unemployed failure who had finally been cut loose. They wanted the world to think I was sleeping in an alley, crying over my lost family. What Britney's followers did not see was the immediate aftermath when the camera stopped recording. The second the live stream ended, Jamal collapsed onto the kitchen stool, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. He had just publicly committed to a $15,000 a night luxury vacation in Carmel by the sea. He had a 5-night minimum stay to pay for plus a hefty security deposit and first-class flights. And thanks to my swift cancellation of his credit lines, his available liquidity was effectively zero. He was leveraged to the absolute maximum, surviving entirely on the revolving credit I had unknowingly provided. He could not back out now. Brittany had tagged the exact dates and general location. Her brand collaborations depended on the aesthetic of this trip. If he failed to produce the luxury beachfront mansion he had just bragged about to thousands of people, his facade of the Wall Street heavy hitter would instantly shatter. Brittany would likely divorce him and her followers would feast on his public ruin. Desperation breeds intense stupidity. Jamal retreated back to the home office, locking the door once again. He scoured his remaining financial options. Traditional banks were entirely out of the question. His debt-to-income ratio was a glowing red nightmare. He needed fast, untraceable cash, which meant turning to the shady, high-interest, short-term lending portals he usually warned his gullible clients against. He found a predatory private lender willing to front the $85,000 needed for the rental, the deposit, and the travel expenses. There was only one massive catch. Because his own credit was severely compromised, the lender required a guarantor with a pristine credit history to underwrite the loan. Jamal did not hesitate for a single second. He still had my social security number, my previous tax returns, and my digital signature saved on his encrypted hard drive from that tax favor years ago. In his arrogant mind, I was already ruined. He assumed that even though he had frozen my checking account, my stellar credit score was still perfectly valid and ripe for exploitation. He rationalized that by the time the high-interest loan defaulted or required payment, he would have secured a new broker commission to pay it off, leaving me completely unaware of the transaction. Jamal felt a surge of adrenaline as the progress bar on the loan portal completed. He was untouchable. He genuinely believed I was currently sitting in some cheap roadside motel, crying over my frozen checking account, completely powerless to stop him. He chuckled to himself, marveling at his own ruthless brilliance. In his mind, forging my signature was not a crime. It was simply a necessary business tactic executed by a superior intellect. With a few rapid keystrokes, Jamal uploaded my personal data. He electronically forged my signature on the digital contracts legally binding me as the sole guarantor for a massive predatory loan. He wired the funds immediately to the property management company to secure the luxury rental, breathing a heavy sigh of relief as the confirmation email hit his inbox. He had saved his image, secured his lavish vacation, and pinned the massive debt squarely on the sister-in-law he despised. 2 days later, I was sitting at the sleek glass desk in my hotel suite, sipping a fresh espresso and going through the quarterly projections for my actual business. I had completely ignored the barrage of social media attacks from my family. Their digital temper tantrums meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. Let them spin their pathetic lies to their fake internet friends. I was too busy managing the coastal real estate empire I had built quietly over the last decade, far away from their greedy hands. My phone screen lit up with a high-priority notification. It was not a text from my furious mother or a gloating message from my brother-in-law. It was an automated alert from the highly secure corporate server of Ocean Breeze Holdings, the primary real estate LLC that I owned entirely. Ocean Breeze managed a portfolio of exclusive ultra-luxury vacation rentals along the California coastline. I clicked open the notification to review the incoming transaction. A new luxury booking had just been confirmed and fully paid for my absolute best property, a stunning cliffside mansion in Carmel by the sea that rented for exactly $15,000 a night. I scanned the guest details and felt a sharp, genuine smile spread across my face. The reservation was booked under the name Jamal Anderson. But the financial guarantee, the legally binding signature attached to the damage deposit, and the underwriting of the entire rental agreement belonged to someone else. Someone just booked my flagship Carmel property using a forged guarantor document carrying my exact name. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct emergency line for my lead property manager at Ocean Breeze Holdings. It rang exactly once before he answered, his voice crisp and professional. Marcus. I said, my tone steady and cold. I am looking at the new priority booking for the Carmel by the Sea estate, the one under the name Jamal Anderson. Yes, Allison, Marcus replied immediately, the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. I was just about to flag that for you. The financial guarantee came through a third-party short-term lending portal, but the guarantor's signature matches your name and personal social security number. I assumed it was a system glitch or a corporate test. Shall I decline the reservation and lock the dates? It is not a glitch, Marcus, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the glass desk. It is a highly documented, incredibly stupid forgery. Marcus drew in a sharp breath. He knew exactly what that meant. In the high-stakes world of luxury real estate, fraud was a serious offense, but forging the signature of the company owner to rent her own property was practically a death wish. I will alert our legal team and contact the local authorities immediately, he said, his voice tightening with urgency. We can have the portal shut down the transaction before the funds even clear. No, I instructed, cutting him off smoothly. I want you to approve it. Push it straight through the system. Take the deposit, confirm the dates, and authorize the digital access codes for their arrival this Friday. Let them in. I will greet them myself. Marcus paused for a fraction of a second, recognizing the icy resolve in my voice. Understood, Allison. The property will be fully prepped and waiting for them. I ended the call and immediately dialed my corporate attorney, Evelyn. She was a ruthless, brilliant lawyer who had helped me build my empire from the ground up over the last decade. Evelyn answered on the first ring, sounding entirely too amused for a Tuesday morning. Well, if it is not my favorite unemployed marketing director, Evelyn greeted me, a rich laugh echoing through the speaker. Tell me, how did it feel to officially fire yourself yesterday? It was liberating, I admitted, a genuine smile finally breaking through, and highly necessary. This was the ultimate secret my family could never fathom. I had not simply lost a mid-level marketing job. I owned the entire global digital marketing conglomerate. Years ago, to keep my greedy, status-obsessed parents from demanding pieces of my actual success, I had created a dummy role for myself at a small subsidiary firm we had recently acquired. I played the part of the mediocre, struggling middle child flawlessly. I attended their agonizing Sunday dinners, listened to their condescending advice, and let them believe I was barely scraping by on a standard salary. But as my parent company expanded, preparing for a massive international merger, I could no longer waste time playing a corporate pawn in my own subsidiary. I needed to step fully into the light as the sole CEO. So I orchestrated my own layoff. I literally signed the paperwork to terminate my dummy position. My family thought I was a pathetic failure being thrown out onto the wet concrete. They had absolutely no idea that my supposed severance package was just me moving capital from my left pocket to my right pocket. I did not call to discuss my brilliant career pivot, Evelyn, I said, shifting my focus back to the immediate threat. I called because my brother-in-law just stepped into a spectacular legal trap, and I need you to document every single angle of it. I forwarded her the digital trail Jamal had carelessly left behind. The forged guarantor documents, the high-interest loan agreement, and the confirmed luxury rental booking. I listened to Evelyn scrolling through the files, her silence speaking volumes. Allison Evelyn finally said, her voice dropping all traces of amusement. This is not just petty family drama. This is felony wire fraud. This is aggravated identity theft. He used your compromised credentials to secure an $85,000 predatory loan across state lines. We have him dead to rights. I can have federal investigators waiting for him at the airport. I know we do, I replied, staring out at the sweeping city skyline. But I do not want him arrested at the airport. That is entirely too easy. Jamal and Brittany have spent the last 48 hours launching a vicious social media smear campaign against me. They are painting me as a toxic, mentally unstable dropout who was fired for gross incompetence. They want the world to believe I am entirely powerless. So what is the play here? Evelyn asked, already pulling up the necessary legal injunctions on her end. The play is patience, I explained. Jamal is currently sweating bullets, terrified that his carefully constructed facade of wealth is crumbling. He thinks he outsmarted the system. He thinks he outsmarted me. I want them to check into the Carmel mansion. I want them to unpack their designer luggage. I want them to pop the expensive champagne lookout over the private beach and gloat to their followers about their untouchable success. And right at the peak of their glorious fraudulent triumph, I am going to walk through the front door and tear their entire reality to shreds. Evelyn chuckled, a dark, approving sound. The documents are locked and sealed on my end. Say the word and I will drop the legal hammer. 2 days later, the California sun beat down on the Pacific Coast Highway. 2 rented, pristine black luxury SUVs cruised smoothly along the winding coastal cliffs. Inside the lead vehicle, Jamal gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles white, hiding his mounting panic behind dark designer sunglasses. He was desperately calculating how many days he had before the predatory loan officers started demanding their first massive repayment. Next to him, Brittany was completely oblivious to her husband's internal crisis. She was busy filming the breathtaking ocean views on her phone, her manicured hand perfectly positioned to show off her wedding ring. She was broadcasting live to her thousands of followers, bragging loudly about the unbelievable surprise anniversary trip her incredible husband had planned. She spun the camera to show Richard and Susan in the back seat, who were eagerly leaning forward, holding glasses of sparkling water and nodding smugly for the audience. They were a picture of absolute unbothered perfection. They gloated about their generational wealth, their exquisite taste, and their beautiful, loyal family unit. They were speeding toward the most exclusive, expensive vacation of their lives, completely unaware that the road they were traveling led straight into a trap I had designed exclusively for them. The drive down the Pacific Coast Highway was a masterclass in manufactured reality. Brittany spent the entire 4-hour trip curating the perfect aesthetic for her followers, recording sweeping shots of the dramatic ocean cliffs through the tinted windows of their rented Cadillac SUV. In the vehicle behind them, Richard and Susan followed closely, likely discussing how perfectly their lives had aligned now that they had successfully excised the heavy, useless anchor that was my existence. They turned off the main coastal road winding through the heavily wooded, ultra-exclusive enclaves of Carmel by the sea. The GPS guided Jamal to a massive custom-built wrought iron gate flanked by ancient Monterey cypress trees. This was Ocean Breeze Holdings' flagship estate. It was a sprawling architectural marvel of glass, imported stone, and reclaimed wood, perched precariously on a private cliffside, overlooking the crashing waves of the Pacific. It was a property designed for tech billionaires and Hollywood elite. It was a property I owned free and clear. As the gate swung open, automatically recognizing the access code Jamal had input into the security terminal, they rolled down the long, crushed white shell driveway. Brittany practically shoved the car door open before the SUV even came to a complete stop. She leapt out her phone already secured on a stabilizing gimbal, broadcasting live to an audience of 50,000 captivated followers. "Welcome to paradise, you guys," Brittany squealed, spinning in a slow circle to capture the immensity of the mansion and the endless ocean horizon behind it. "I told you Jamal had the most insane anniversary surprise planned. This entire estate is ours for the week. No negative energy allowed, just wealth, health, and extreme luxury." She pointed the camera at Richard and Susan, who were climbing out of the second SUV. Susan waved graciously, adjusting her oversized designer sunglasses, looking every bit the proud matriarch. "We are so incredibly blessed to have a son-in-law who takes such wonderful care of this family," Susan announced loudly to Brittany's camera, ensuring her voice carried over the sound of the ocean. "It is just so refreshing to finally be surrounded by pure, unselfish success." Jamal stepped out of the driver's seat, tugging at the collar of his expensive linen shirt. He forced a wide, arrogant smile for the camera, puffing out his chest as Brittany panned the lens his way. Inside, however, his stomach was churning with a toxic cocktail of anxiety and adrenaline. He was $85,000 in the hole to a shadow lender who charged exorbitant daily interest rates. He had committed severe federally prosecutable identity theft to secure this very driveway he was standing on. But looking at the mansion, looking at his adoring wife, and incredibly impressed in-laws, he convinced himself the massive risk was entirely justified. He was Jamal Anderson. He always landed on his feet. He just needed to survive this week, get back to the office, and close a massive deal before the bill came due. "Let us go inside and claim our castle," Jamal said smoothly, wrapping an arm around Brittany's waist and leading the entourage toward the massive, intricately carved front door. Brittany kept the live stream rolling, narrating their approach. The front entrance was flanked by modern water features and equipped with a state-of-the-art digital security keypad. Jamal pulled his phone from his pocket, pulling up the confirmation email from Ocean Breeze Holdings. He stepped up to the keypad, projecting an air of absolute ownership. He confidently punched in the 6-digit access code provided in the email. The keypad beeped once. A sharp mechanical buzz echoed in the quiet air, and the digital screen flashed a bright, angry red. "Access denied." Jamal frowned, a slight prickle of irritation breaking through his carefully cultivated calm. "Hold on," Brittany said to her audience, letting out a breathy, practiced laugh. "The tech mogul over here is having a little trouble with the smart house. Give him a second." Jamal cleared his throat, his thumb hovering over the keypad. He looked at the email again, ensuring he had not transposed any numbers. He carefully typed the sequence a second time, pressing each digit deliberately. Beep, buzz. The screen flashed red again. Access denied. A heavy, uncomfortable silence descended over the porch, broken only by the sound of the crashing waves below. Susan shifted her weight, exchanging an annoyed glance with Richard. Richard tapped his foot against the stone patio. "Come on, Jamal," Richard grumbled impatiently. "We have luggage to bring in, and your mother-in-law wants to open the champagne. Do not tell me you booked the wrong dates." "I did not book the wrong dates," Jamal snapped, his voice losing its smooth, polished edge. He wiped a sudden bead of sweat from his forehead. "It is just a glitch in their system. These luxury automated houses always have bugs. Let me try it one more time." Brittany's smile was beginning to look strained on the live stream. The comments on her feed were starting to roll in, faster followers asking why they were locked out of their own luxury rental. She angled the camera slightly away from Jamal, trying to distract the audience by showcasing the landscaping. Jamal gritted his teeth. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. He punched the numbers in for a third time, his fingers striking the glass panel with unnecessary force. The keypad did not just flash red this time. A loud, continuous alarm tone sounded from the panel, and a bold yellow message locked onto the screen. "Security protocol engaged. Authority lockout. Please contact management." "What the hell is this?" Jamal shouted, losing his temper completely. He raised his foot and violently kicked the heavy oak door. "Open up!" Brittany jumped the camera, jerking wildly. "Jamal, stop it, you are on live!" She hissed, her face flushing with absolute embarrassment. Her followers were flooding the chat with laughing emojis and questions about whether they had actually rented the house at all. "This is entirely unacceptable," Susan declared, crossing her arms over her chest. "Jamal, you paid a fortune for this place. Call the property manager right this instant and demand they send someone out here. We are not standing on a porch like common trespassers." Richard stepped up next to Jamal, peering closely at the locked digital screen. "Are you sure your payment actually cleared, Jamal?" Richard asked, a sudden note of deep suspicion creeping into his voice. "After the absolute disaster with Allison at the grocery store, I am not in the mood for any more financial surprises." Jamal spun around, his face pale, his eyes wide with rising panic. "Of course it cleared," he barked defensively. "I guarantee you it cleared." Before Jamal could pull out his phone to call the emergency contact number listed in his email, the reflection of the glass door caught his attention. It was not the reflection of the ocean or the sunset. It was a rhythmic pulsing flash of red and blue. The entire family turned slowly toward the long, winding driveway. A pair of local police cruisers, their light bars flashing silently without the sirens blaring, rolled smoothly past the wrought iron gates. They cruised down the crushed shell path and angled themselves perfectly across the width of the driveway, completely blocking the rented SUVs from any possible escape. 4 uniformed officers stepped out of the cruisers simultaneously, their boots crunching against the pristine white shells of the driveway. They moved with a calm, practiced authority, fanning out to secure the perimeter. The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe expression, rested his hand casually near his utility belt. "Step away from the door, sir," the lead officer commanded, his voice projecting clearly over the sound of the crashing ocean waves. "Keep your hands where we can see them, and slowly step down from the porch." Jamal froze, his hands still hovering near the flashing red keypad. The color completely drained from his face, replaced by a sickly, pallid gray. For a split second, the sheer terror of his fraudulent actions paralyzed him. He thought the predatory lender had already tracked him down. He thought his financial crimes had caught up with him before he even managed to unpack his bags. But as his survival instincts kicked in, his panic instantly morphed into explosive defensive rage. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Jamal shouted, his voice cracking slightly as he puffed out his chest. "I am not stepping away from my own rental property. I am a paying guest." Brittany gasped, her perfectly curated influencer aesthetic crumbling in real time. She frantically adjusted her phone, trying to keep the live stream going while simultaneously attempting to frame the escalating situation as a minor humorous misunderstanding. "Oh my gosh, you guys, Carmel's security is literally so intense," Brittany chirped to her audience, though her voice shook with undeniable anxiety. "They dispatch the actual police if you type your luxury smart house code incorrectly. Talk about VIP protection problems, right?" But the comments flooding her screen were not sympathetic. Her followers were rapidly typing questions, noticing the genuine panic in Jamal's voice and the severe stance of the police officers. The pristine illusion of their wealthy, unbothered lifestyle was actively fracturing live on the internet. Susan clutched Richard's arm, her face twisting into a mask of absolute elitist horror. She looked around frantically, terrified that the billionaire neighbors in the adjacent cliffside estates might be watching them through their floor-to-ceiling windows. "Richard, do something," Susan hissed through gritted teeth. "Tell them who we are. We are not the type of people who get accosted by law enforcement in our own driveway. This is incredibly humiliating." Richard stepped forward, adopting his most authoritative, condescending posture. "Officers, there has clearly been a massive administrative error," Richard declared, loudly waving a dismissive hand. "We are an affluent family, vacationing from out of state. My son-in-law just paid a small fortune for this beachfront estate. You are harassing the wrong people. I strongly suggest you lower your voices before I contact the police chief." The lead officer did not even blink at Richard's empty threats. He kept his gaze locked entirely on Jamal. "We received an automated alert from this exact property," the officer stated, his tone flat and unyielding. "A silent intrusion alarm was triggered at that access panel. The property management company flagged a level 1 unauthorized entry attempt." "I will not ask you again, sir. Step down from the porch." The words unauthorized entry attempt echoed in Jamal's ears. His fragile ego already battered by his secret financial ruin and the stress of the forged loan completely shattered. He went into full arrogant finance bro survival mode. He marched down the stone steps, his face flushed red with unhinged fury. He pulled up the digital lease agreement on his tablet, his fingers trembling with rage as he shoved the glowing screen aggressively toward the officer's chest. "Read the damn paperwork!" Jamal spat, his voice echoing off the expensive stone facade of the mansion. "I rented this from Ocean Breeze Holdings. I paid $85,000 for this week. Do you have any idea who I am? I manage more capital in a single morning than you make in an entire decade on a cop salary. I am a senior wealth broker, and this is my 5-year anniversary vacation. Now tell whoever is running this faulty garbage security system to unlock my front door immediately." Brittany scrambled down the steps behind him, still holding her phone high. "Jamal, babe. Maybe calm down a little," she whispered frantically, glancing at the rapidly scrolling comments on her live stream. People were calling her husband unhinged. They were pointing out how sweaty and desperate he looked. The entire narrative of the suave, successful investor was dissolving into a public meltdown. "I will not calm down," Jamal yelled, ignoring his wife and stepping closer to the lead officer. "I want your badge numbers, all of you. I will have your jobs for harassing a high-net-worth individual on private property. Call Ocean Breeze Holdings right now. Get the CEO on the phone and explain why you are ruining my vacation." The lead officer remained perfectly stoic, completely unfazed by the screaming man-child in front of him. He calmly took the tablet from Jamal's shaking hand and looked down at the digital lease agreement. He scanned the first page, noting Jamal's name listed under the primary guest registry. Then the officer's eyes flicked down to the second page, resting squarely on the guarantor section, the exact section where Jamal had fraudulently forged my signature to secure the predatory loan. The officer's radio crackled softly on his shoulder. A dispatcher's voice murmured a brief, staticky confirmation code. Jamal crossed his arms over his chest, a smug, triumphant sneer fighting its way through his panic. "You see my name on that lease, right?" Jamal demanded, tapping the glass screen of the tablet. "I hold the keys to this castle. Now back off and let us inside." The lead officer slowly handed the tablet back to Jamal. He looked at the paperwork, then lifted his head completely, ignoring Jamal's aggressive posturing. Instead, the officer looked past Jamal's shoulder, focusing his attention on the shadowy entryway of the mansion behind them. The officer's posture relaxed slightly, a knowing, respectful look crossing his stern face. "Did you hear me?" Jamal screamed, incensed that the officer was not apologizing. "I said, call the owner." A heavy metallic thud echoed across the porch. The solid oak front door clicked open from the inside. The heavy oak door swung inward with a smooth, silent glide that spoke of expensive hinges and impeccable craftsmanship. The salty ocean breeze swept across the porch, rustling the collar of Jamal's shirt, but he remained frozen, his arm still suspended in the air from where he had pointed at the digital keypad. I stepped out into the fading California sunlight. I was no longer the exhausted, emotionally drained woman they had violently evicted into a thunderstorm just 48 hours ago. Gone were the baggy sweatpants, the tear-stained cheeks, and the posture of a scapegoat who had spent 30 years shrinking herself to make her family comfortable. Instead, I wore a sharply tailored, deep emerald designer suit that cut a striking, authoritative silhouette against the backdrop of the massive foyer. A pair of understated diamond studs caught the late afternoon light. In my right hand, I casually held a crystal balloon glass filled with a generous pour of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. I took a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes scanning the pathetic tableau assembled on my front porch. Jamal's jaw dropped. His mouth opened and closed like a dying fish, producing absolutely no sound. Brittany, still holding her phone in a white-knuckled grip, visibly recoiled, her perfectly curated influencer smile collapsing into an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. In the background, Richard and Susan stood rooted to the crushed shell driveway, their arrogant posturing instantly evaporating into bewildered silence. "Good afternoon, Officer Miller," I said smoothly, my voice carrying a quiet, unshakable authority. I stepped forward, the heels of my designer pumps clicking sharply against the imported stone patio. "I apologize for the commotion. I was in the West Wing reviewing some quarterly reports and did not hear the perimeter alarm right away. The lead officer, the very same man who had remained entirely impassive while Jamal screamed in his face, immediately softened his stance. He gave a sharp, respectful nod in my direction. "Not a problem at all," Ms. Wilson Officer Miller replied, his tone polite and deferential. "We received the Level 1 alert from the primary dispatch and got here as quickly as we could." He gestured casually toward Jamal and the frozen cluster of my family members. "Is this the group trespassing on your property, ma'am?" The word trespassing hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Brittany's phone slipped in her hand, the live stream capturing the entire humiliating exchange. Her thousands of viewers were now witnessing the ultimate unscripted reality show. Her frantic eyes darted between me, the police, and her husband, completely unable to process the shifting power dynamic. "Wait! What is happening?" Brittany shrieked, her voice pitching into an embarrassing shrill register. "Allison, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Susan pushed her way past Richard and stormed up the stone steps, her face flushing with a chaotic mix of confusion and deep-seated indignation. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as she took in the expensive tailoring of my suit and the casual, proprietary way I stood on the massive porch. Her brain, hardwired by decades of narcissistic superiority, scrambled to find a narrative that fit her incredibly narrow worldview. "Allison, Marie." Susan snapped, pointing an accusing finger at me. "I demand to know what is going on here. Did you follow us? Is this some kind of sick, obsessive stunt?" She glanced nervously at the police officers, then back to me, her expression twisting into a sneer of condescending pity. "And what are you wearing? Did you steal those clothes from the homeowners? I know you are desperate and broke, but sneaking into a wealthy person's vacation rental and pretending to work here just to harass us is a new low even for you." I swirled the dark red wine in my glass, watching the rich liquid coat the crystal. I did not raise my voice. I did not break eye contact. I simply let her finish her desperate, pathetic assessment. "Tell these officers you are the hired help," Susan demanded, her voice shrill with mounting panic. "Tell them you are cleaning the place or organizing the pantry or whatever menial labor you begged them for so we can start our vacation. You are humiliating us in front of the authorities." I took another slow, luxurious sip of the Cabernet, savoring the rich finish before lowering the glass. "I don't clean it, Mom," I said, the words falling from my lips with the weight of an anvil. "I own it." Complete suffocating silence descended over the driveway. The only sound was the rhythmic crashing of the Pacific Ocean against the cliffs below. Susan stared at me, the color draining from her face so rapidly I thought her perfectly applied blush might flake off. Her mouth hung open, but the words refused to come. Richard practically stumbled backward, his hand catching the side of the rented SUV to steady himself. The reality of the situation was a concept so alien, so utterly contrary to the pathetic scapegoat narrative they had forced upon me for my entire life, that their brains simply refused to compute the information. "I own this estate," I continued, my voice steady and merciless. "I own the acreage it sits on. I own the private beach below it. And as Officer Miller here can attest, I own Ocean Breeze Holdings, the corporate entity that manages this property, and 20 others exactly like it, up and down the California coastline." Brittany let out a choked, breathless gasp. She looked down at her phone screen where the live comments were scrolling by at an impossible speed. Her followers were losing their minds, calling out the massive discrepancy between her tearful morning broadcast about her broke toxic sister and the highly successful mansion-owning woman standing confidently in front of them. No, Jamal suddenly barked, his voice loud and desperate. The sound shattered the frozen silence. Jamal pushed past Brittany, his chest heaving, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated denial. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "That is a complete lie," Jamal yelled, turning his frantic gaze toward Officer Miller. "Do not listen to a single word she says. She is a fraud. She is a total fraud. I know for a fact she was fired from a pathetic entry-level marketing job just 2 days ago. She has absolutely zero assets. She has zero capital. My mother-in-law is right." Jamal let out a loud barking laugh, a sound so entirely devoid of humor it sounded like a cough. He gestured aggressively toward me, stepping dangerously close to the officers. "She is a delusional, unemployed squatter who broke in here to ruin my anniversary," Jamal declared, a manic grin spreading across his sweating face. "Arrest her immediately." Officer Miller did not reach for his handcuffs. He did not radio for backup. Instead, he turned his severe gaze away from me and focused entirely on Jamal, his expression radiating absolute professional disdain. The seasoned police officer had dealt with enough affluent fraudsters and arrogant trespassers in Carmel to instantly recognize the sharp, unmistakable stench of a desperate lie. I stepped gracefully toward a sleek black leather portfolio resting on a wrought iron patio table nearby. I unzipped it smoothly, extracting a pristine stack of heavily embossed, watermarked legal documents. "These are the corporate filings for Ocean Breeze Holdings," one stated, handing the thick packet to the lead officer along with my platinum state identification card. "Included is the master deed to this specific parcel, the corporate registry listing me as the sole proprietor and chief executive officer, and the corresponding tax records for the estate." Officer Miller accepted the documents. The entire driveway fell into a suffocating, suspended silence as he methodically reviewed the paperwork. The crashing ocean waves below the cliff provided a dramatic soundtrack to the agonizing wait. Jamal stood frozen, the manic grin slowly melting off his sweating face. Susan craned her neck, desperately trying to read the papers from 10 feet away, her brain violently rejecting the reality unfolding in front of her. Officer Miller flipped to the final page, examined the raised notary seal, and then carefully scrutinized my platinum ID. He handed the documents back to me with a sharp, respectful nod. "Everything is in perfect order, Ms. Wilson," Officer Miller announced, his voice carrying clearly across the driveway. He turned his imposing frame toward Jamal, his hand dropping back down to rest near his utility belt. "Sir, this woman is exactly who she claims to be. She is the legal owner of this property and the CEO of the management company. You are the one holding a fraudulent lease. The family's curated, manufactured reality violently fractured." Richard staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. His decades of experience in the cutthroat finance sector finally kicked in, piecing together the fragmented puzzle of the past 48 hours. The sudden eviction, the suspiciously timed luxury vacation, the bizarre bank glitches. Richard whipped his head toward his son-in-law, his eyes burning with a sudden, ferocious realization that Jamal had orchestrated a massive, catastrophic financial fraud. Susan clutched her designer handbag against her chest, hyperventilating. "That is impossible!" Susan shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the stone facade. "She was just evicted. She lived in a filthy, tiny apartment. You officers are being fooled. Look at her. She is a failure." But it was Brittany who completely unraveled. The polished, unbothered influencer aesthetic shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The live stream was still broadcasting from her phone, completely capturing the humiliating destruction of her brand. The chat feed was a blazing waterfall of comments, with followers screen recording the entire meltdown and calling out the blatant criminality happening live on their screens. "No, no, no!" Brittany screamed, her voice cracking as she shoved her camera directly into Jamal's pale, sweating face. "Tell them she is lying. Tell them it is impossible." Jamal could not speak. His vocal cords were paralyzed by sheer, unadulterated terror. He knew what he had done. He knew he had forged my signature. He knew he had taken $85,000 from a shadow lender who would absolutely break his legs when the payment bounced. Brittany spun back toward the police, completely losing her mind, and confessing to a federal crime in front of 50,000 live viewers. "She is broke," Brittany wailed, pointing an accusing, manicured finger at me. Jamal froze her bank accounts. "We took everything she had. We watched her balance go down to absolute zero on the app. She does not have a dime to her name." Officer Miller raised a single eyebrow, his hand reaching for the radio on his shoulder. "Ma'am, did you just admit that your husband illegally accessed and froze another citizen's financial accounts?" I let out a soft, melodic laugh. The sound cut through Brittany's hysterical sobbing like a razor blade. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my vintage Cabernet, savoring the rich, complex finish. I looked at Jamal, watching the absolute terror drown him from the inside out. "You froze a dummy payroll account with $60,000 in it, Jamal," I said, my voice dripping with lethal amusement. "Did you really think my corporate trust of $5 million was accessible through a retail banking app?" Jamal dropped to his knees. His legs simply gave out. The crushed white shells of the driveway dug into his expensive linen pants. But he did not feel it. The sheer gravity of his monumental stupidity crushed him into the ground. He had not stolen my wealth. He had stolen my pocket change. He had left a glaring, undeniable digital trail of federal identity theft and wire fraud, all to secure a predatory loan for a fake vacation rental that he could never access. He had destroyed his career, his marriage, and his freedom in a single arrogant sweep. Susan began to sob uncontrollably, realizing that her golden child and her perfect son-in-law were about to be arrested on her dream vacation. Richard backed away from the group entirely, throwing his hands up in a desperate attempt to distance himself from the radioactive fallout of Jamal's crimes. Before Officer Miller could read Jamal his Miranda rights, the heavy oak front door of the mansion swung open even wider. The heavy, authoritative footsteps of dress shoes echoed across the stone porch. An impeccably dressed man in a tailored charcoal suit emerged from the shadows of the grand foyer. He bypassed me completely, his face a mask of absolute predatory legal precision. He walked straight down the porch steps, past the bewildered police officers, and stopped directly in front of the kneeling, weeping Jamal. My high-powered corporate lawyer stared down at my brother-in-law, his expression utterly devoid of mercy. He reached out and forcefully shoved a thick, heavy legal binder directly into Jamal's trembling chest. Jamal stumbled backward, the sheer weight of the leather-bound binder nearly knocking him off balance. He clutched it instinctively against his chest, his eyes darting frantically between the imposing attorney and the stone-faced police officers. "My name is Marcus Vance," my lawyer announced, his voice carrying the chilling clinical precision of a seasoned litigator preparing to dissect a hostile witness. "I represent Ocean Breeze Holdings and Ms. Allison Wilson. What you are holding, Mr. Anderson, is a comprehensive forensic financial audit. It details exactly how you committed multiple counts of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny over the past 48 hours. Susan gasped, gripping Richard's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Richard stood paralyzed, the arrogant patriarch suddenly reduced to a terrified spectator as his carefully constructed family hierarchy imploded. "That binder contains the digital footprint of the loan you secured using my client's forged signature." Marcus continued, stepping closer to Jamal, backing him toward the police cruisers. "It contains the IP address of the device you used, the timestamp of the fraudulent application, and the exact routing numbers of the shadow lender who wired you $85,000 at a predatory daily interest rate. You did not just lie to your family, Jamal. You lied to the federal banking system." Jamal's mouth worked furiously, but his throat was completely dry. He looked at Brittany, seeking an ally, but his wife was staring at the binder as if it were a live grenade. Her live stream was still running, capturing every agonizing second of her husband's public crucifixion. "But the fake rental application is merely the tip of the iceberg," Marcus stated smoothly, turning his attention to Officer Miller. "Officers, I have already forwarded a copy of this audit to the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as the Fraud Division of the FBI." Jamal dropped the binder. It hit the driveway with a heavy, final thud, the pages spilling out onto the white shells. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded, his voice cracking. He stepped forward, his self-preservation overriding his shock. "Jamal is a senior wealth broker. He manages high-tier portfolios. He makes mid-six figures." I laughed, a sharp, genuinely amused sound that echoed over the crashing waves. "He makes a base salary of $70,000 a year, Richard." Brittany's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with manic denial. "You are lying. We fly first class. I have a closet full of Birkin bags. Jamal just bought me a brand new Range Rover for my birthday. We are rich." "You are deeply in debt, Brittany," I corrected her, my tone devoid of any sympathy. You are a localized social media influencer who refuses to get a real job, and your husband is a desperate man who could not afford to fund your manufactured lifestyle on his legitimate salary. Marcus adjusted his cuffs, his expression devoid of pity. Ms. Wilson is entirely correct. For the past 2 years, Mr. Anderson has been systematically embezzling funds from his elderly clients at the brokerage firm. He has been diverting small, consistent amounts from low-activity retirement accounts into offshore holding companies, and then funneling that stolen capital back into his personal checking accounts to pay for luxury cars, designer clothes, and extravagant vacations. He stole the money to buy your lifestyle, Brittany. Brittany let out a piercing, guttural shriek. She dropped her phone. The screen shattered against the stone steps, abruptly cutting off the live feed to her 50,000 viewers, plunging them into sudden darkness right at the climax of the scandal. She lunged at Jamal, hitting his chest with her fists. "You ruined my life," Brittany sobbed hysterically. "My brand is dead. I am going to be associated with a criminal." Jamal grabbed her wrist, shoving her away with a sudden wild burst of desperate energy. He turned to Officer Miller, holding his hands up in a placating, entirely transparent gesture of innocence. "Listen to me, Officer," Jamal pleaded, his voice adopting the slick, rapid-fire cadence of a cornered salesman. "These people do not understand modern financial architecture. What they are calling embezzlement is actually a highly sophisticated temporary liquidity reallocation. I was utilizing decentralized finance protocols to leverage dormant capital into high-yield crypto staking pools. It is a standard arbitrage strategy. The funds were never missing. They were temporarily locked in a blockchain smart contract to generate passive yield before being fully reconstituted. It is completely legal in the Web3 space." Officer Miller frowned, the onslaught of technical jargon momentarily stalling his momentum. He glanced down at the spilled audit papers, clearly trying to parse the truth from the complex financial word salad Jamal was aggressively throwing at him. I stepped down from the porch, closing the distance between myself and Jamal. I did not raise my voice. I simply let the absolute certainty of my knowledge crush his pathetic defense. "Do not insult my intelligence, Jamal," I said, my voice slicing through the salty air like a scalpel. "You did not utilize a decentralized finance protocol. You wired fiat currency directly into a centralized, unregulated offshore exchange that collapsed 3 months ago. You lost every single penny of your client's money in a failed altcoin rug pull." Jamal stumbled back a step, his eyes darting frantically. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are a marketing assistant. I am the chief executive officer of a real estate holding company that manages over $40 million in coastal assets." I shot back, stepping closer, refusing to let him breathe. "You were so desperate to cover your massive losses before the quarterly audits next week that you panicked. You needed liquidity immediately to show your brokerage firm that the client accounts were whole. So you went to a predatory shadow lender. You took out a high-interest short-term bridge loan. But your credit is garbage, Jamal. You are leveraged to the hilt on Brittany's credit cards. So you used my name, you used my old address. You forged my signature as a guarantor because you thought I was still the broke, compliant sister you could easily steamroll when the bill came due." I stopped inches from his face, looking directly into his terrified, cornered eyes. "You did not reallocate capital, Jamal. You stole from senior citizens to buy your wife a handbag, and then you committed federal identity theft against me to try and hide it. And now you have absolutely nowhere left to run." The silence that followed was absolute. The arrogant, untouchable golden child of the family had been completely dismantled. His crimes laid bare in front of the parents who had worshipped him and the police officers he had tried to intimidate. Susan let out a weak, breathy moan and collapsed against Richard, completely overwhelmed by the utter destruction of her carefully maintained social standing. Richard stared at Jamal with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The man he had constantly compared me to, the man he had held up as the pinnacle of success, was nothing more than a common thief. Officer Miller let out a slow, heavy breath. He reached behind his back, his hand wrapping around the cold metal on his utility belt. The sharp, distinctive click of metal hitting metal echoed sharply in the quiet driveway. Officer Miller pulled out his handcuffs, looking directly at Jamal. Officer Miller did not hesitate. He lunged forward with the practiced efficiency of a man who had apprehended hundreds of white-collar criminals. He grabbed Jamal by the shoulder of his expensive linen jacket, spinning the self-proclaimed wealth broker around with enough force to make Jamal stumble. Jamal let out a pathetic, high-pitched yelp. Wait, let us negotiate this. He stammered, his polished finance bro persona completely disintegrating into the terrified babble of a cornered coward. I can write a check. I can make everyone whole. Just let me call my managing director. You have the right to remain silent. Officer Miller barked, sweeping Jamal's arms aggressively behind his back. The heavy steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around Jamal's wrists with a harsh, unforgiving click that seemed to echo for miles down the California coastline. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The physical reality of the metal binding his wrists finally broke through Jamal's thick skull. His knees buckled. If Officer Miller had not been holding him up by the bicep, Jamal would have collapsed face first into the pristine white shells of the driveway. He was crying now, ugly guttural sobs that shook his entire body. The man who had spent the last 5 years aggressively mocking my modest lifestyle, flaunting his leased luxury cars and phantom wealth, was currently weeping like an infant while a police officer read him his Miranda rights. Marcus, my corporate attorney, stood perfectly still, watching the arrest with the clinical detachment of a predator watching struggling prey. He stepped back, allowing the second officer to move in and assist Miller in patting down the suspect. They pulled a sleek leather wallet and a set of keys from Jamal's pockets, cataloging the items of a man whose glamorous life was officially over. No, Brittany shrieked, the sound tearing out of her throat with a raw, primal intensity. She lunged forward, but her designer heels caught on the uneven driveway. She went down hard, her knees slamming into the crushed shells. As she fell, the phone she had been gripping like a lifeline slipped from her sweaty fingers. It hit the ground, the protective case doing absolutely nothing to stop the screen from fracturing into a spider web of shattered glass. But the phone did not turn off. It landed face up, the cracked lens pointing directly at the cloudy blue caramel sky, the microphone perfectly positioned to capture every single humiliating second. The live stream was still active. 50,000 people were currently watching a distorted ground-level view of Brittany Anderson's absolute destruction, the chat feed exploding with a relentless torrent of mocking comments and screen recordings that would live on the internet forever. Brittany did not even care about the phone anymore. Her entire identity, built entirely on the illusion of Jamal's infinite wealth, was evaporating. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the sharp shells tearing through her expensive silk trousers. She dragged herself toward the stone steps of the porch, stopping just short of my designer pumps. "Allison, please," Brittany wailed, her mascara running down her face in thick, dark streaks. Her carefully manicured nails dug into the stone patio as she looked up at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic panic. "You have to stop this. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. Tell them we are family. You cannot let them take him away. If Jamal goes to prison, I lose everything. My brand, my house, my followers. Please, Allison, I am begging you. Do not do this to your own sister." I looked down at the weeping, trembling woman at my feet. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no vindication. Just a profound, liberating emptiness. The sister who had orchestrated my eviction, who had stood in my living room and laughed as I begged for more time, was now crawling on the ground, begging me for mercy. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my Cabernet, letting the silence stretch, forcing her to stew in the agonizing reality of her own making. A misunderstanding. I repeated, my voice devoid of any warmth or familial affection. Your husband systematically stole money from elderly pensioners to pay for your luxury vacations. He committed federal wire fraud and forged my signature to rent a house he could not afford, purely to flex for his internet followers. There is no misunderstanding here, Brittany. There is only a massive financial audit and a pair of handcuffs. But I did not know, Brittany sobbed, clutching her chest. I swear I did not know he was stealing it. You have to tell the police I had nothing to do with it. You have to protect me. I stared into her tear-streaked face, noting the absolute selfishness of her plea. Even now, watching her husband being marched toward a police cruiser, her only concern was saving her own skin and preserving her fake internet brand. "Ignorance is not innocence," I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "You love the money, Brittany. You love the cars and the bags and the attention. You never once questioned how a mid-level broker was funding a millionaire lifestyle because you simply did not care as long as you got to play the wealthy, successful sister while treating me like garbage." She opened her mouth to argue, a fresh wave of hysterical tears building in her eyes. I leaned forward slightly, looking directly into her panicked, mascara-stained eyes. "You told me a week ago that failures do not belong in nice houses," I said, delivering the words with surgical precision. "Have a safe trip to the precinct." Brittany let out a loud, agonizing wail, collapsing flat onto the stone patio, burying her face in her hands as her entire world completely imploded. Behind her, Officer Miller forcefully guided Jamal toward the back of the flashing police cruiser, pushing the sobbing, ruined finance bro down into the hard plastic seat. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing Jamal's fate behind bulletproof glass. Susan was leaning heavily against the rented Cadillac, gasping for air, her hand clutching her chest, as if she were having a genuine cardiac event. She was entirely incapable of processing the scene. Her perfect daughter was weeping on the ground, her wealthy son-in-law was locked in a squad car, and her scapegoat daughter was sipping vintage wine on the porch of a multi-million-dollar coastal estate. But Richard did not collapse. Richard did not weep. The patriarch of the family stood rigidly in the center of the driveway, his hands balled into tight, white-knuckled fists. The veins in his neck bulged, pulsing against his collar. The psychological dissonance of the moment was violently tearing his mind apart. He had spent his entire life demanding subservience, worshipping financial dominance, and dictating the exact hierarchy of his family. He had relentlessly championed Jamal as the ultimate standard of male success while constantly grinding me down into the dirt. To accept this new reality, to accept that Jamal was a pathetic criminal and that I was a billionaire CEO, would mean admitting his entire worldview was a catastrophic, pathetic failure. And Richard Wilson was a man who never, ever admitted defeat. A low, guttural growl began to build in the back of his throat. His face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of purple, the color of a man completely losing his grip on sanity. He ignored the flashing police lights. He ignored his sobbing wife and daughter on the ground. He locked his burning, furious eyes entirely on me. Richard let out a roar of pure, unhinged rage and charged violently forward directly toward the porch. Officer Miller did not hesitate. He lunged forward with the practiced efficiency of a man who had apprehended hundreds of white-collar criminals. He grabbed Jamal by the shoulder of his expensive linen jacket, spinning the self-proclaimed wealth broker around, with enough force to make Jamal stumble. Jamal let out a pathetic, high-pitched yelp. Wait, let us negotiate this." He stammered, his polished finance bro persona completely disintegrating into the terrified babble of a cornered coward. "I can write a check. I can make everyone whole. Just let me call my managing director." "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Miller barked, sweeping Jamal's arms aggressively behind his back. The heavy steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around Jamal's wrists with a harsh, unforgiving click that seemed to echo for miles down the California coastline. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The physical reality of the metal binding his wrists finally broke through Jamal's thick skull. His knees buckled. If Officer Miller had not been holding him up by the bicep, Jamal would have collapsed face first into the pristine white shells of the driveway. He was crying now, ugly, guttural sobs that shook his entire body. The man who had spent the last 5 years aggressively mocking my modest lifestyle, flaunting his leased luxury cars and phantom wealth, was currently weeping like an infant while a police officer read him his Miranda rights. Marcus, my corporate attorney, stood perfectly still watching the arrest with the clinical detachment of a predator watching struggling prey. He stepped back, allowing the second officer to move in and assist Miller in patting down the suspect. They pulled a sleek leather wallet and a set of keys from Jamal's pockets, cataloging the items of a man whose glamorous life was officially over. No, Brittany shrieked, the sound tearing out of her throat with a raw, primal intensity. She lunged forward, but her designer heels caught on the uneven driveway. She went down hard, her knees slamming into the crushed shells. As she fell, the phone she had been gripping like a lifeline slipped from her sweaty fingers. It hit the ground, the protective case doing absolutely nothing to stop the screen from fracturing into a spider web of shattered glass. But the phone did not turn off. It landed face up, the cracked lens pointing directly at the cloudy blue caramel sky, the microphone perfectly positioned to capture every single humiliating second. The live stream was still active. 50,000 people were currently watching a distorted ground-level view of Brittany Anderson's absolute destruction, the chat feed exploding with a relentless torrent of mocking comments and screen recordings that would live on the internet forever. Brittany did not even care about the phone anymore. Her entire identity, built entirely on the illusion of Jamal's infinite wealth, was evaporating. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the sharp shells tearing through her expensive silk trousers. She dragged herself toward the stone steps of the porch, stopping just short of my designer pumps. "Allison, please!" Brittany wailed, her mascara running down her face in thick, dark streaks. Her carefully manicured nails dug into the stone patio as she looked up at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic panic. "You have to stop this. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. Tell them we are family. You cannot let them take him away. If Jamal goes to prison, I lose everything. My brand, my house, my followers. Please, Allison, I am begging you. Do not do this to your own sister." I looked down at the weeping, trembling woman at my feet. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no vindication, just a profound, liberating emptiness. The sister who had orchestrated my eviction, who had stood in my living room and laughed as I begged for more time, was now crawling on the ground begging me for mercy. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my Cabernet, letting the silence stretch, forcing her to stew in the agonizing reality of her own making. A misunderstanding. I repeated, my voice devoid of any warmth or familial affection. Your husband systematically stole money from elderly pensioners to pay for your luxury vacations. He committed federal wire fraud and forged my signature to rent a house he could not afford purely to flex for his internet followers. There is no misunderstanding here, Brittany. There is only a massive financial audit and a pair of handcuffs. But I did not know, Brittany sobbed, clutching her chest. I swear I did not know he was stealing it. You have to tell the police I had nothing to do with it. You have to protect me. I stared into her tear-streaked face, noting the absolute selfishness of her plea. Even now, watching her husband being marched toward a police cruiser, her only concern was saving her own skin and preserving her fake internet brand. "Ignorance is not innocence," I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "You loved the money, Brittany. You loved the cars and the bags and the attention. You never once questioned how a mid-level broker was funding a millionaire lifestyle because you simply did not care, as long as you got to play the wealthy, successful sister while treating me like garbage." She opened her mouth to argue, a fresh wave of hysterical tears building in her eyes. I leaned forward slightly, looking directly into her panicked, mascara-stained eyes. "You told me a week ago that failures do not belong in nice houses," I said, delivering the words with surgical precision. "Have a safe trip to the precinct." Brittany let out a loud, agonizing wail, collapsing flat onto the stone patio, burying her face in her hands as her entire world completely imploded. Behind her, Officer Miller forcefully guided Jamal toward the back of the flashing police cruiser, pushing the sobbing, ruined finance bro down into the hard plastic seat. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing Jamal's fate behind bulletproof glass. Susan was leaning heavily against the rented SUV, gasping for air, her hand clutching her chest as if she were having a genuine cardiac event. She was entirely incapable of processing the scene. Her perfect daughter was weeping on the ground, her wealthy son-in-law was locked in a squad car, and her scapegoat daughter was sipping vintage wine on the porch of a multi-million-dollar coastal estate. But Richard did not collapse. Richard did not weep. The patriarch of the family stood rigidly in the center of the driveway, his hands balled into tight, white-knuckled fists. The veins in his neck bulged, pulsing against his collar. The psychological dissonance of the moment was violently tearing his mind apart. He had spent his entire life demanding subservience, worshipping financial dominance, and dictating the exact hierarchy of his family. He had relentlessly championed Jamal as the ultimate standard of male success while constantly grinding me down into the dirt. To accept this new reality, to accept that Jamal was a pathetic criminal, and that I was a billionaire CEO, would mean admitting his entire worldview was a catastrophic, pathetic failure. And Richard Wilson was a man who never ever admitted defeat. Officer Miller turned around from the squad car, pointing a stern finger at the patriarch. "Stay exactly where you are, sir." Richard ignored the police officer completely. A low, guttural growl began to build in the back of his throat. His face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of purple, the color of a man completely losing his grip on sanity. He ignored the flashing police lights. He ignored his sobbing wife and daughter on the ground. He locked his burning, furious eyes entirely on me. Richard let out a roar of pure, unhinged rage and charged violently forward directly toward the porch. Officer Miller did not even flinch. Moving with the practiced, heavy grace of a veteran law enforcement official, he stepped squarely into Richard's path. He did not draw his weapon or reach for his taser. He simply planted his boots on the crushed shells and threw up a massive, unyielding hand, creating an impenetrable physical barrier between my raging father and the stone steps of the porch. "Take one more step toward this property, sir, and you will be sharing the back seat of that cruiser with your son-in-law," Officer Miller commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly register. "Stand down, now." Richard collided with the invisible wall of the officer's authority. He stopped short, his chest heaving violently beneath his golf shirt, his dress shoes skidding slightly on the driveway. Denied the ability to physically intimidate me, his rage immediately mutated into a venomous, desperate verbal assault. "You ungrateful monster!" Richard screamed, the veins in his neck standing out like thick purple cords. "Do you think any of this matters? Do you think buying some coastal real estate makes you superior to this family? You are a toxic, vindictive parasite. You have destroyed your sister's marriage and humiliated us in front of the authorities." I stood perfectly still, watching the man who had tormented me for 3 decades completely unravel. "I do not care how much money you have scammed or what corporate titles you bought," Richard continued, his voice echoing shrilly over the rhythmic crash of the Pacific waves. "You are dead to me. You are permanently disowned from the family estate. Do you hear me? You will never be allowed back into my suburban home. You will never set foot on my property ever again." A sudden sharp sound shattered the heavy tension on the driveway. Marcus, my impeccably tailored corporate lawyer, threw his head back and laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a loud, barking laugh of pure, unadulterated amusement. The sound was so entirely out of place, so entirely devoid of the fear or respect Richard demanded, that it stopped my father's tirade dead in its tracks. Richard stared at the attorney, his mouth hanging open in bewildered fury. I stepped forward, the heels of my designer pumps clicking with absolute finality against the stone patio. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I held all the power, and the quiet certainty of my tone was 1,000 times more lethal than his screaming. "You're home, Dad?" I asked smoothly, looking him dead in the eye. "Are you absolutely certain about that?" Richard's jaw tightened. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the dominant patriarch persona that was rapidly slipping through his fingers. "I bought that colonial house 30 years ago," he snarled. "I paid for the roof over your head. It is my castle, and you are banished from it." I did not break eye contact. Instead, I reached into the sleek leather briefcase Marcus was holding open for me. I pulled out a second, much thinner file. It was a simple manila folder, but the documents inside carried the explosive yield of a tactical missile. "Let us take a brief trip down memory lane." "Dad," I said, my voice carrying the crisp, detached cadence of an executive delivering a quarterly loss report. 3 years ago, your precious manufacturing firm took a massive hit during the supply chain crisis. You told Mom it was a minor cash flow hiccup. You told Vincent and Gregory it was a temporary market adjustment. But that was a lie, was it not? Susan turned her head sharply, staring at her husband. Richard's face suddenly lost its furious purple hue, draining into a sickly, chalky white. It was not a hiccup. I continued stepping down to the bottom step of the porch, closing the distance. You were completely over-leveraged. You bled your personal savings dry, trying to keep the business afloat and project the image of a wealthy CEO. You drained the equity lines, and then you stopped paying the mortgage. That is a lie, Susan gasped, her voice trembling as she looked frantically between me and her husband. Richard, tell her she's lying. We have never missed a payment. We are perfectly fine. He missed 14 consecutive payments, Mom, I corrected her mercilessly. He hid the notices from the bank. He intercepted the certified mail. He was so terrified of bruising his fragile narcissistic ego that he let the bank completely foreclose on the property. 3 years ago in October, your perfect suburban estate went straight to the county auction block. Richard's hands were shaking now. The arrogant bravado had entirely evaporated, replaced by the panicked, cornered look of a man whose deepest, darkest secret had just been dragged out into the daylight. No, Richard stammered, his voice dropping to a desperate, raspy whisper. I fixed it. I fixed it before the auction. I found a private equity firm. They offered a specialized modification program for distressed executives. I signed the paperwork. I saved the house. I slowly opened the manila folder. I pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper stamped with the seal of the state of Massachusetts. You did not sign a modification program, Dad, I said, my voice dropping like an anvil. You signed a master lease agreement. Richard stared at me, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. His brain simply refused to process the words. The firm you dealt with was called Apex Residential Solutions. I stated, reading directly from the corporate filing. Did you ever bother to look up their parent company, Dad? Did you ever bother to check who actually funded that last-minute rescue? Marcus stepped forward, his shark-like smile returning. Apex Residential Solutions is a wholly owned subsidiary of Ocean Breeze Holdings. The attorney clarified, his voice ringing with absolute legal authority. Susan let out a choked, breathless gasp, pressing her hands over her mouth. I bought the house, Dad, I said, delivering the ultimate devastating payload. I bought it from the bank at auction, paying entirely in cash, because I knew that if I did not intervene, you and Mom would be thrown out onto the street with absolutely nothing. Richard staggered backward. He looked like a man who had just been shot in the chest. He grabbed the side of the rented SUV, his knees buckling under the catastrophic weight of the revelation. But I pay the property taxes, Richard argued, his voice pitching into a shrill, hysterical register. I log into the county portal every single month and I pay the taxes. I am the owner. I smiled, a cold, empty expression that offered absolutely no comfort. You log into a payment gateway designed by my IT department? I corrected him, driving the final nail into the coffin of his pride. You are not paying property taxes, Richard. You are paying rent. You are my tenant. The reality crashed down on the driveway with the force of a tsunami. The silence was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Susan stared at her husband in sheer horror, realizing her entire life of suburban superiority was built on a foundation of complete financial ruin. She did not own her home. She did not own her status. She was living on the secret charity of the daughter she had spent decades emotionally destroying. And then, the ultimate crushing irony of the situation settled over them. 2 days ago, during a raging thunderstorm, Richard and Susan had screamed at me, packed my bags, and violently evicted me from the premises. They had thrown me out onto the street, calling me a failure and a parasite, completely unaware of the radioactive truth hovering over their heads. They had just evicted their own landlord. Officer Miller intercepted the charging patriarch before Richard's foot even hit the first stone step. The seasoned cop did not bother with verbal warnings or de-escalation tactics this time. He simply planted his shoulder directly into Richard's chest, using the older man's own momentum against him. Richard hit the invisible wall of the officer's tactical vest and bounced backward, staggering wildly, before landing hard on the crushed shells right next to his weeping daughter. Stay on the ground, Officer Miller commanded, his hand resting definitively on his utility belt. "If you make another aggressive move toward this property, you will be joining your son-in-law in lockup for attempted assault." Richard scrambled to his hands and knees, his breath coming in ragged, humiliated gasps. His expensive golf shirt was smeared with dirt and dust. He looked up at me, his face twisted into a mask of feral, impotent fury. "You cannot do this to me." Richard spat, his voice cracking under the strain. "I am your father. I built this family. You owe me everything." Marcus stepped smoothly in front of me, entirely unbothered by Richard's tantrum. The lawyer adjusted his tailored jacket, looking down at my father with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a struggling insect. "You built a house of cards," Richard Marcus corrected him, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "And you just handed us the matches." Marcus unclasped his leather portfolio again and pulled out a fresh stack of legal documents. These papers were bordered in stark red ink, carrying an undeniable visual weight. "As the legal owner of the Massachusetts property, Ocean Breeze Holdings granted you a highly subsidized residential lease," Marcus explained, his voice projecting clearly across the chaotic driveway. "A lease with very specific legally binding stipulations. Stipulations you have flagrantly violated over the past 48 hours. 2 nights ago, you physically forced my client out of her primary residence during a severe weather event," Marcus stated, stepping down to drop the first document directly onto the shelves in front of Richard. "Ms. Wilson was not a guest. She was a registered paying tenant of that household. By changing the locks and tossing her belongings onto the street, you committed an illegal retaliatory eviction without providing the mandatory 30-day written notice required by state law. That alone is grounds for immediate termination of your agreement." Richard stared at the red-bordered paper fluttering on the ground. His mind, completely short-circuited by the consecutive blows, failed to produce a coherent argument. "It is my house," he repeated weakly, a broken record playing its final track. "It is her house," Marcus countered effortlessly. "And you have thoroughly polluted it. Your lease agreement contains a strict criminal activity and morality clause. It expressly forbids harboring individuals engaged in felony financial crimes." Marcus gestured casually toward the police cruiser where Jamal sat confined in the back seat. "By allowing your son-in-law to use that property as a staging ground for embezzling client funds and committing wire fraud, you are now legally classified as an accessory to his lease violations. You have turned a corporate asset into a haven for federal criminals." Brittany, still sprawled on the ground, let out a fresh sob. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whimpered, realizing her backup plan of moving into her parents' basement was evaporating before her eyes. "We do not have a house anymore." Marcus pulled the final document from his folder. It was a single heavy sheet of paper. He did not drop this one. He leaned down and pressed it directly against Richard's trembling chest, forcing the older man to take it. "Because of these severe documented breaches of contract, Ocean Breeze Holdings is exercising its right to bypass the standard eviction timeline," Marcus declared, his voice carrying the finality of a judge reading a sentence. "You are hereby served with an emergency 24-hour vacate notice." The words hit the driveway like a physical detonation. 24 hours. The reality of those numbers crashed over Richard and Susan simultaneously. They were not just losing their social status. They were losing their shelter. "You have until exactly 5 o'clock tomorrow evening to remove your personal belongings from the premises." Marcus continued, his voice devoid of any human empathy. "At 5:01, a private security team will secure the property. Any items left behind will be considered abandoned and disposed of at your expense. If you attempt to access the house after the deadline, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing." Richard slowly crumpled inward. The fight finally left his body, draining away into the white shells beneath him. He looked down at his shaking hands, realizing he had absolutely nothing left to leverage. No money, no property, no power. He was an aging, bankrupt man, kneeling in the dirt, completely at the mercy of the daughter he had spent a lifetime destroying. Susan could not process the silence. Her brain, hardwired for survival through manipulation, violently shifted gears. The arrogance and condescension she had worn like armor for 30 years instantly vanished, replaced by a terrifying, frantic desperation. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, pushing past a paralyzed Richard and a weeping Brittany. Her designer dress caught on the jagged driveway stones, tearing the expensive fabric, but she did not stop until she reached the bottom step of the porch. Allison. Susan gasped, tears pouring down her face, ruining her immaculate makeup. She threw her hands out, grasping at the empty air near my feet. She dropped her forehead almost to the ground, abandoning every single shred of her dignity in a desperate bid for survival. Allison, please forgive me. Susan sobbed, her voice echoing with pathetic devotion. We were wrong. We were so wrong. She looked up, her face a mask of chaotic, manufactured worship. I always knew you were special, my sweet girl. I always knew it. I looked down at the weeping, trembling woman groveling on the stone patio. My mother. The woman who had spent the last 30 years treating me like a burdensome afterthought was now clawing at my ankles desperately, trying to rewrite history to save her own skin. I felt absolutely nothing for her. The well of my familial empathy had run completely dry. Stop it, I commanded, my voice slicing through the crisp caramel air like a scalpel. Get off the ground, Susan, you are embarrassing yourself. She recoiled as if I had physically struck her, her hands flying to her chest. Allison, how can you speak to me like that? She gasped, attempting to pivot instantly from groveling victim to offended matriarch. I am your mother. I have loved you since the day you were born. I always pushed you because I knew you had this incredible potential. I let out a short, harsh laugh. You pushed me, I repeated, stepping back so she was forced to look up at me from the dirt. You threw my entire college art portfolio into the municipal dumpster because you needed the shelf space to display Brittany's middle school cheerleading participation trophies. You told me my marketing degree was a worthless joke, yet you demanded I hand over my first corporate paycheck to fund your golden child's backpacking trip through Europe. Do not dare insult my intelligence by calling your systemic emotional abuse love. Richard, finally finding his voice, stepped forward, his fists still clenched at his sides. We raised you, he bellowed, attempting to summon the booming, authoritarian tone he had used to terrorize me throughout my childhood. We put food on your plate. We put a roof over your head. You owe us respect. You put a roof over my head until your fragile ego bankrupted the family, I fired back, meeting his furious glare without blinking. You lost the house, Richard. You failed. You drove your manufacturing firm into the ground, you drained your equity, and you let the bank take your precious suburban castle. And instead of acting like a man and admitting your catastrophic failure, you let an anonymous LLC buy it at auction. You let me save you from living in a motel, and you repaid that secret grace by continuing to treat me like absolute garbage. We were desperate, Susan cried, scrambling to her feet, her designer dress smeared with driveway dust. We were trying to protect the family image. We did not want to burden you with our struggles. You did not want to burden me, I echoed, keeping my eyes locked on her tear-streaked face. 2 nights ago you stood on this exact porch. You watched your husband hurl my suitcases into a freezing thunderstorm. You stood there and laughed while Brittany mocked my clothes and Jamal threatened to call the police on me. You gleefully kicked me out into the rain from a house I legally own. You did not care about burdening me when you thought I was poor. You only care now because I hold the deed to your entire life. We did not know it was your house, Richard argued, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. You deceived us. You lied to your own parents. You trapped us in a fraudulent lease. I gave you a subsidized lease so you could maintain your pathetic country club facade, I corrected him, my voice ringing with absolute clinical precision. I charged you a fraction of the market rate so you could continue playing the role of the wealthy patriarch. But ignorance is not an excuse for cruelty, Dad. You showed me exactly who you are. You showed me that your love is entirely conditional upon financial dominance. You only respect power and money. Well, I have both, and you have absolutely neither. Susan grabbed Richard's arm, her fingers digging into his golf shirt. We are your parents, she wailed, her voice echoing off the surrounding coastal estates. You have a duty to us. You cannot just throw us out onto the street. What will our friends think? What will the neighbors say? You terminated your parental privileges the moment you handed me a trash bag and told me failures do not belong in your home. I said, delivering the words with relentless finality. I am simply enforcing the exact standards you established. You set the rules of this family, Susan. I am just finally playing the game to win. Every time Brittany overdrafted her credit cards, buying designer handbags, you called me. I continued refusing to give them a single inch of breathing room. You demanded I empty my bank account so your golden child could lease a Mercedes she did not earn. You called me selfish and vindictive for refusing to drain my savings to fund her luxury delusions. You told me sisters support each other. Where was my support when I was standing in the freezing rain begging for one more week? Where was my family when I was crying on the pavement? This is a misunderstanding, Richard stated, trying desperately to sound authoritative, attempting to wrestle control of a situation that was already miles out of his grasp. We can sit down with the lawyers. We can negotiate a proper living arrangement. We can figure out a transfer of the deed. There is no negotiation, Marcus interjected smoothly, stepping forward to flank me. The paperwork has already been filed with the county clerk. The sheriff's department has a verified copy of your emergency vacate notice. Tomorrow at exactly 5 o'clock in the evening, the locks on your suburban home will be changed. If you are still inside the premises, you will be arrested and charged with criminal trespassing. Susan let out an agonizing, high-pitched shriek, burying her face in her hands, as the absolute reality of her impending homelessness finally crushed her. Richard stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently, looking like a man who had just watched his entire empire burn to ashes in a matter of seconds. Behind them, the sharp slam of a heavy car door echoed across the driveway. Officer Miller had finished loading Jamal into the back of the flashing police cruiser. The disgraced wealth broker was completely secured behind the bulletproof glass, his face buried in his handcuffed hands, his shoulders shaking with violent, pathetic sobs. Brittany, who had been sitting paralyzed on the stone patio throughout my entire confrontation with our parents, slowly pushed herself up. Her knees were scraped and bleeding from the sharp shells. Her silk trousers were ruined. Her mascara had run down her cheeks, making her look like a terrifying, shattered porcelain doll. She watched the police officer walk around to the driver's side of the cruiser. She watched the heavy engine rumble to life. She watched the red and blue lights paint the coastal fog, signaling the absolute end of her glamorous, fake internet life. Brittany slowly turned her head, fixing her wide, terrified eyes on me. "Allison." Brittany whispered, her voice trembling with a raw, hollow panic as the police cruiser began to roll down the driveway. "How am I supposed to survive now?" I stared down at the ruined woman kneeling on my patio. Brittany's chest heaved with panicked, ragged breaths. She was looking up at me as if I held the magic formula to reset reality, waiting for the sister she had relentlessly bullied to swoop in and save her from the consequences of her own fraudulent existence. For years, she had weaponized her curated internet life against me, broadcasting her leased luxury and fake opulence to make me feel small. Now the illusion was dead. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting her agonizing question hang in the salty coastal air. I looked at her shattered phone still lying face up on the stone patio, its cracked camera lens broadcasting her absolute destruction to the world. "You have 50,000 followers, Brittany?" I said, my voice entirely devoid of pity. "Maybe one of them will let you sleep on their couch." Brittany let out a sharp, devastated gasp. Her hands flew to her face, smearing her expensive makeup even further as the sheer icy finality of my words registered. She realized in that exact moment that her digital audience did not care about her. They were only there for the aesthetic, the glamour, and the fantasy. Now that the fantasy was over, she had absolutely no one. Behind her, the police cruiser's heavy engine revved. The tires crunched against the white shells of the driveway as the officer shifted the vehicle into drive. The red and blue lights swept across the manicured landscaping one last time before the cruiser pulled out of the estate gates, taking Jamal and the last shreds of Brittany's fake empire down the winding coastal highway toward the county jail. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the driveway. The wind whipped off the Pacific Ocean, rustling the tall cypress trees, chilling my parents and sister as they stood frozen in the aftermath of their complete undoing. But the universe was not finished dismantling their lives. Before the wail of the police siren could even fade into the distance, a new sound cut through the foggy morning air. The heavy grinding rumble of a commercial diesel engine echoed up the private road. Moments later, a massive flatbed tow truck pulled through my front gates, followed closely by a sleek black sedan bearing the discreet silver logo of an elite exotic car rental agency. Richard snapped out of his catatonic state, his brow furrowing in confusion. He stepped forward as the two vehicles parked aggressively close to the pair of gleaming leased SUVs that Jamal had driven to my estate to show off. Two men wearing dark polo shirts and tactical sunglasses stepped out of the black sedan. One of them held a digital tablet and a ring of master keys. He walked straight past Richard without even acknowledging him and approached the first luxury SUV, checking the vehicle identification number against his screen. "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" Richard demanded, his patriarchal bravado flaring up in a desperate knee-jerk reaction. "Step away from those vehicles. Those are leased to my son-in-law. You are trespassing on private property." Marcus, who had been watching the scene with deep amusement, cleared his throat. "Actually, Richard, this is my client's property, and she granted the recovery agent's gate access 10 minutes ago." The lead recovery agent did not even look up from his tablet. Jamal Anderson's accounts were frozen by federal authorities at 7 o'clock this morning. The agent stated, his voice carrying the bored, mechanical tone of a man who repossessed cars for a living. "The primary credit cards on file for these two rentals bounced hard about an hour ago. We are executing an immediate asset recovery." Susan let out another horrified gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "No, you cannot take the cars," she wailed, her eyes darting frantically between the tow truck and the black sedan. "How are we supposed to leave? We have our things in there." The agent finally looked up, his expression entirely unsympathetic. "You have exactly 5 minutes to retrieve your personal belongings before these vehicles are loaded onto the flatbed, Mom," he said. "After that, anything left inside becomes property of the rental agency." The absolute crushing humiliation of the moment settled over my family like a lead weight. Richard Wilson, a man who had spent his entire life obsessing over status optics and financial dominance, was now forced to scramble like a common thief. "Move," Richard barked at his weeping wife and daughter, his voice cracking with panic. "Get the bags out of the trunks, now!" It was a pathetic, degrading spectacle. Susan and Brittany scrambled across the crushed shells, tearing open the rear hatches of the luxury SUVs. They dragged out heavy, oversized Louis Vuitton suitcases, dropping them unceremoniously into the dirt. Richard struggled to pull his expensive golf clubs and leather garment bags from the back seat, his face flushed and sweating with the physical exertion. They were bumping into each other, panting and frantic, throwing their unpaid-for luxury luggage onto the driveway before the agents locked them out forever. I stood on the porch holding my glass of Cabernet, watching them empty their fake lives onto the ground. They had arrived at my home just 2 days ago like conquering royalty, ready to mock my modest lifestyle and demand my submission. Now they were literally tossing their bags into the dirt while repo men stood over them with stopwatches. "Time is up," the agent announced. He pressed a button on his key fob. The heavy rear doors of both SUVs slammed shut automatically, locking with a sharp, synchronized chirp. The tow truck operator immediately began hooking heavy steel chains to the front axle of the larger vehicle. The second agent climbed into the driver's seat of the other SUV, starting the engine with a loud, aggressive roar. Within 3 minutes, the recovery team had secured the assets. The flatbed truck slowly turned around, its reverse alarm beeping loudly, echoing off the stone walls of my estate. The agent in the black sedan followed closely behind. They drove down the long driveway and out through the iron gates, leaving the property entirely empty of their presence. The silence that returned was absolute. My family stood in the center of the vast circular driveway. They were surrounded by a chaotic pile of expensive designer luggage, garment bags, and golf clubs. The cold, damp coastal fog was beginning to roll in from the ocean, clinging to their designer clothes and ruining their carefully styled hair. They had no cars. They had no money. They had just been legally evicted from the suburban home they thought they owned. They were standing on an isolated stretch of the Carmel coastline, miles away from the nearest town, completely and utterly stranded. Richard stood frozen among the pile of suitcases. He looked at the empty space where the rental cars had been, then looked at the long, winding road leading out of the estate. The reality of their total isolation finally broke through his stubborn, arrogant mind. His shoulders slumped. His hands fell uselessly to his sides. He turned slowly to face the porch, looking up at me and Marcus. The furious, demanding patriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified, stranded old man. Allison Richard said, his voice trembling with a mixture of raw panic and absolute defeat. "How are we supposed to get back to the city?" The question hung in the damp, salty air, fragile and breathtakingly pathetic. I looked at the man who had terrorized my entire childhood. Richard was shivering. His expensive moisture-wicking golf shirt offered absolutely zero protection against the Pacific fog that was rapidly swallowing the peninsula. His face, usually flushed with unwarranted arrogance and booming authority, was pale and slack. He was genuinely waiting for me to solve his logistical nightmare. Even now, completely stripped of his power, his fake wealth, and his dignity, he expected the daughter he had spent a lifetime discarding to step into the role of the obedient concierge. I lifted my crystal wine glass, the deep, blood-red liquid catching the amber glow of the porch lights. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich flavor coat my tongue. The wine was perfect. The temperature of the evening was perfect. This absolute, irreversible reality was perfect. "You want me to arrange your transportation?" I stated, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying across the driveway with the force of a physical blow. "You spent 30 years telling me I was useless. You told me I lacked the intelligence to navigate the real world. You demanded I figure things out on my own while you handed Brittany the keys to your fraudulent kingdom. Now you stand in the dirt on my property, completely bankrupt, and you expect me to play your savior." Richard opened his mouth, his jaw working as he tried to stammer out a defense. "But we are your family. You cannot just leave us out here. It is getting dark, Allison. It is freezing. We do not have our cars. Jamal took all our cash for his legal retainer yesterday. My phone is almost dead. We have nothing." I tilted my head, studying them like a museum exhibit I was already entirely bored of. I looked at Susan. The matriarch, who cared only for country club gossip, was now hugging her arms around her chest, her teeth chattering audibly as the coastal chill sank into her bones. I looked at Brittany. The golden child was frantically swiping at her cracked phone screen with trembling raw fingers, realizing that her 50,000 followers were not going to send a helicopter to rescue her. And then I looked at my father, the defeated hollow shell of a man who had built a life on quicksand. I thought back to 2 nights ago. I remembered the freezing rain soaking through my thin jacket. I remembered the heavy, violent thud of my own suitcases hitting the wet asphalt as they were thrown from the door. I remembered Susan laughing. I remembered Richard turning his back on me. And I remembered the exact arrogant sneer on my brother-in-law's face as he locked me out in the storm. I lowered my glass. My face relaxed into a polite, chilling smile. It was the exact same empty corporate smile my mother had used for decades to dismiss people she deemed beneath her. It was the smile of someone who was completely fundamentally unbothered by the suffering of strangers. "We are busy," I said, delivering the words with a slow, venomous precision. "Try Uber." The shock that hit them was visceral. It was a visible physical impact. Brittany let out a fresh hysterical wail, dropping her useless phone into the white shells. Susan dropped to her knees again, grasping at the air as if she could physically catch the words and shove them back into my mouth. Richard just stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant, finally understanding that his reign of terror was permanently over. He had no power here. He had no leverage. He was nothing. I did not wait for another desperate plea. I did not need to hear another manufactured apology. I simply turned my back on them. I walked across the smooth stone of the patio, my heels clicking with a steady, rhythmic finality. Marcus fell into step beside me, his leather portfolio securely tucked under his arm. The brilliant lawyer did not spare them a single backward glance, his professional duty executed flawlessly. We stepped over the threshold, moving from the biting, damp coastal chill into the immense, soaring warmth of my home. The grand foyer was bathed in soft golden light. It smelled of sea salt polished wood and absolute security. I reached for the heavy, solid oak front door. I looked through the glass panels one last time. I saw 3 small, ruined figures standing in the dirt. They were surrounded by a chaotic barricade of useless designer luggage, Gucci garment bags and Louis Vuitton suitcases, sitting in the mud holding expensive clothes they would never have an occasion to wear again. They were shivering in the thickening fog, looking exactly like what they were: trespassers waiting to be removed. I swung the heavy oak door shut. The thick wood hit the frame with a deep, resonant thud. I reached up and turned the heavy brass deadbolt. The sharp metallic click echoed through the grand foyer. It was the sound of a bank vault locking. It was the sound of a lifetime of trauma, manipulation, and gaslighting being permanently sealed outside in the cold. Outside, the dense caramel fog thickened into a heavy gray blanket rolling over the driveway and entirely swallowing the shivering figures of the family that had tried to break me. They were left stranded on the edge of the continent, holding on to empty bags, waiting in the freezing dark for a rescue that would never ever come. But inside there was only warmth. There was only absolute peace. The camera of my mind panned away from the pathetic scene on the driveway, soaring up past the slate roof of the magnificent mansion. It rose high into the evening sky, leaving the trivial drama of the driveway far below. It flew over the jagged, ancient coastal cliffs, sweeping out over the vast, churning expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The water stretched out endlessly toward the horizon, dark and powerful and completely untamed. It represented everything I had become. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the financial safety net for a family of parasites. I was no longer the victim of their narcissistic games. I had reclaimed my life, secured my total financial dominance, and built an empire they could never touch. The waves crashed against the rocks below, singing a song of pure, unadulterated victory. I walked toward my massive chef's kitchen, poured myself another generous glass of Cabernet, and smiled into the quiet warmth of my beautiful home. I was finally free.